A Flight to Remember. Dr. Olivia Harper adjusted her glasses and tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear as she approached the bustling gate at Logan International Airport. Her carry-on bag rolled smoothly behind her, and her tailored blazer and matching slacks gave her a sharp professional appearance. Olivia had grown used to the stares she sometimes received in settings like this, stares filled with curiosity or, at times, surprise. Today, however, her focus wasn't on the people around her, but on the speech she was set to deliver at an international medical conference in San Francisco. It was a culmination of years of research and sacrifice, and she was determined to make an impact. The boarding announcement for her flight interrupted her thoughts. She glanced at her first-class ticket, the reward for her tireless dedication to her career, and moved toward the priority boarding line. As Olivia stepped onto the jet bridge, she was greeted by a cheerful flight attendant who directed her toward the first-class cabin. Olivia found her seat, a window spot with extra legroom and privacy. She placed her leather tote bag in the overhead compartment and took her seat, the soft cushion and plush headrest already making her feel at ease. Her tablet and notebook came out almost immediately, her pen gliding across the pages as she fine-tuned her talking points. Around her, other passengers settled in, some checking their phones while others sipped complimentary drinks. Olivia stayed focused, her mind racing through the key statistics she planned to present. A few minutes later, Sophia Blake, the lead flight attendant for this leg of the journey, entered the first-class cabin with her clipboard. Dressed impeccably in her Navy uniform, Sophia exuded authority. She had worked for the airline for over a decade and prided herself on maintaining order, especially in the elite first-class section. She made a habit of glancing over the passengers, subtly assessing the dynamics of the cabin. Her eyes landed on Olivia. For a fleeting moment, Sophia hesitated. There was no outward reason to question Olivia's presence. Her attire was professional and her demeanor calm. But something about her stirred a nagging doubt in Sophia's mind. Sophia approached Olivia with a polite smile, masking her inner unease. "Good afternoon," she began. "May I see your boarding pass, please?" Olivia looked up, slightly surprised but unfazed. "Of course," she replied, pulling the neatly folded ticket from the side pocket of her tote. Sophia scanned the ticket, her expression tightening ever so slightly. It was a legitimate first-class ticket, but that gnawing doubt wouldn't leave her. "Thank you," Sophia said, handing it back. "Let me know if you need anything." Olivia nodded politely and returned to her notes, dismissing the encounter as routine. As the cabin filled, Olivia noticed Sophia near the galley, speaking in hushed tones with another flight attendant. Both glanced in her direction, occasionally, their expressions unreadable. Olivia tried to ignore them, but a flicker of unease settled in her chest. She'd encountered similar situations before, moments when her accomplishments and right to be in a space were quietly questioned. But she chose to focus on her work, her pen moving steadily across the page. The plane doors closed, and the captain's voice came over the intercom. Olivia leaned back, ready for the flight, when Sophia approached her row again. This time, her demeanor was less friendly. "Dr. Harper," Sophia said, her tone professional, but laced with an unspoken tension. "Could I speak with you privately?" Passengers in the cabin exchanged curious glances as Olivia stood and followed Sophia to the galley. The confined space felt even smaller under the weight of the moment. "There seems to have been an error with your booking," Sophia began. "It appears this seat was assigned incorrectly. I'll need to ask you to move to the main cabin." Olivia blinked, her surprise quickly giving way to a calm but firm response. "There must be a mistake," she said. "I purchased this ticket weeks ago, and it was confirmed." Sophia's expression hardened. "I've double-checked, and I'm afraid the error still stands. If you could collect your belongings, I'll help you find a seat in economy." The implication in Sophia's words was clear, and Olivia felt the familiar pang of frustration. Still, she refused to lose her composure. "I'd like you to double-check again," she said evenly, her voice steady despite the tension. "I'm certain this is my assigned seat." Sophia hesitated, her jaw tightening. "Dr. Harper, we don't have time to argue. Please follow me, or I'll have to involve security." The threat hung in the air like a cloud. Olivia straightened her posture, her gaze unwavering. "If that's your decision," she said, her voice measured, "then I'll comply for now." Back in the first-class cabin, the air felt heavier as passengers whispered amongst themselves. Sophia, though outwardly composed, felt her confidence waver. She could sense the judgment in the glances cast her way, and her satisfaction from the earlier confrontation quickly dissipated. Meanwhile, Olivia settled into a cramped middle seat in the economy cabin. The contrast between the luxurious first-class space and her current surroundings only deepened her resolve. She opened her phone and made a brief call, her voice low but purposeful. "Hi, it's Olivia," she said. "I need a favor. Something's happened, and I'd like it addressed immediately." Her tone was calm, but there was no mistaking the determination behind her words. Olivia wasn't the type to let injustice slide, not when it came to her or anyone else. Sophia moved through the first-class cabin, her usual confidence giving way to an unsettling doubt. Dennis, the senior flight attendant, watched her carefully, his experienced eye picking up on the tension. "What happened with the woman you moved?" Dennis asked, his tone calm but probing. "There was a mix-up with her ticket," Sophia replied, avoiding his gaze. Dennis frowned. "You're sure about that?" First-class passengers don't usually take kindly to being moved. Sophia felt her composure slipping further. "It's fine," she insisted. "I followed protocol." But as she walked away, Sophia couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this situation wasn't going to end as smoothly as she'd hoped. The ripple effect. The soft hum of the airplane engines filled the cabin as Olivia sat in her new seat, wedged between a man engrossed in his laptop and a young woman flipping through a magazine. The limited space and stale air of the economy section were stark reminders of the stark injustice she had just endured. Her composed demeanor masked a simmering frustration. She wasn't angry. Anger clouded judgment. Instead, she felt the familiar spark of determination that had carried her through countless challenges before. Olivia opened her phone again, scrolling through her contacts until she found the name she was looking for. With a swipe, she sent a succinct text. "Incident on Flight 382. Need escalation. Details to follow." She leaned back in her seat and glanced out the small window at the vast expanse of blue sky. The injustice she had faced wasn't just a personal affront. It symbolized a much larger issue, one she wasn't about to ignore. Olivia had built her career not only as a healer, but also as an advocate, fighting for fairness in spaces that were often blind to systemic biases. This was another battle, and she was ready for it. In the first-class cabin, Sophia moved mechanically through her tasks, her confidence continuing to erode. The curious glances from passengers weighed heavily on her, their silent judgments growing louder in her mind with each passing second. Dennis, the senior flight attendant, watched her carefully, his concern for the situation deepening. "You're sure about the ticket mix-up?" Dennis asked again, catching Sophia near the galley. Sophia stiffened, her defensiveness flaring. "I told you, Dennis, I checked everything." Her seat didn't seem right for her. Dennis' frown deepened. "Didn't seem right. Based on what?" He leaned in, lowering his voice. "You're making assumptions, Sophia, and it's not sitting well with anyone. Least of all me." "I don't have time for this," Sophia snapped, turning away. But as she walked back to the cabin, her heart raced. Dennis's words echoed in her mind, cutting through the thin veneer of justification she had built for herself. Meanwhile, Olivia remained focused. She opened her notebook and began writing, the words flowing quickly onto the page. She documented every detail of the incident, Sophia's demeanor, the conversations, and the reactions of the other passengers. Her notes weren't just a recounting of events. They were a blueprint for action. A flight attendant approached her, a young woman with kind eyes and an apologetic smile. "Ma'am, I just wanted to check if you're comfortable. Can I get you anything to drink?" Olivia looked up, appreciating the effort. "Water would be fine." "Thank you," she said, her tone calm but measured. The attendant hesitated. "I'm sorry for what happened earlier," she said quietly. "If there's anything I can do to make this right, please let me know." Olivia offered a small smile. "Thank you. Your kindness is noted." As the attendant moved away, Olivia's resolve deepened. She wasn't seeking sympathy. She was seeking accountability. This wasn't just about her. It was about ensuring no one else endured what she had faced. Back in first class, Sophia's unease was palpable. Passengers whispered quietly among themselves, their curiosity growing. One man finally voiced what others were thinking. "Excuse me," he said, catching Sophia's attention. "What happened to the woman who was sitting here? I saw her being moved." Sophia faltered, her rehearsed composure slipping. "There was a mix-up with her ticket," she said quickly, her tone defensive. The man raised an eyebrow. "A mix-up?" She seemed like she belonged here as much as anyone else. "Are you sure about that?" Sophia felt her cheeks flush. "I handled it," she said tersely, stepping away before the conversation could continue. But the man's words lingered, each one chipping away at her confidence. As the flight continued, Olivia received another text. "Incident logged. Reviewing security footage. Stand by." She tucked her phone back into her bag, her expression calm but resolute. The wheels were already in motion, and she knew it was only a matter of time before the situation reached its tipping point. Olivia wasn't someone who acted impulsively. She planned every move with precision. This was no different. By the time the plane began its descent, the tension in the cabin was palpable. Passengers whispered openly now, their eyes darting between Sophia and the back of the plane where Olivia sat. Dennis approached Sophia one last time as the flight prepared for landing. "You've got to address this," Dennis said quietly but firmly. "Whatever you think you're avoiding, it's going to catch up with you as soon as we land." Sophia glared at him, her frustration boiling over. "I don't need a lecture, Dennis." He held her gaze, unflinching. "You don't need a lecture, you need accountability. Because if you don't own this, it's going to own you." As the plane touched down and taxied to the gate, Olivia remained seated, her posture calm and composed. She waited as other passengers gathered their belongings and began to disembark. When it was her turn, she walked toward the exit, her every step deliberate. Sophia stood at the door, her forced smile faltering as Olivia approached. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause. "Thank you for flying with us, Dr. Harper," Sophia said, her voice wavering. Olivia stopped, her gaze steady. "This isn't the last time we'll speak," she said softly but firmly. Then, without waiting for a response, she stepped into the terminal. As Olivia walked through the bustling airport, her phone buzzed again. The message was brief but decisive. "Formal investigation initiated. Await next steps." She smiled faintly. This was just the beginning. The unraveling. The bustling terminal at San Francisco International Airport was alive with the familiar chaos of disembarking passengers and the relentless rhythm of announcements. Olivia Harper moved through the crowd with quiet determination, her every step a testament to her resolve. Behind her, the events of Flight 382 were already being scrutinized. Ahead of her, she saw opportunity, an opportunity to turn an act of injustice into a demand for systemic change. As she reached the baggage claim area, her phone buzzed again. The message was from the airline's executive team. "Please confirm your availability for a debriefing tomorrow at 10:00 a.m. Olivia typed a quick response. "Confirmed. I expect full transparency and updates on corrective measures." She slipped the phone into her pocket just as her sleek black suitcase appeared on the carousel. Retrieving it, she turned toward the exit where a car waited to take her to her hotel. Her thoughts were already on the meeting ahead. This wasn't just about her. It was about dismantling the unspoken biases that pervaded institutions like this one. Back at the terminal gate, Sophia Blake sat in the crew lounge, her head in her hands. The sterile white walls seemed to close in around her as she replayed the events of the flight. The nagging doubts she had tried to suppress during the journey were now impossible to ignore. Her actions hadn't been protocol. They had been personal, driven by assumptions she could no longer justify. Dennis entered the lounge, his expression a mix of frustration and concern. He placed a cup of coffee on the table in front of Sophia and sat across from her. "I warned you," he said, his tone softer than before. "This isn't going away." Sophia lifted her head, her eyes red-rimmed. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she murmured. "I thought I was making the right call." Dennis leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "The right call," he repeated, incredulous. "Sophia, you moved a paying first-class passenger to economy without a valid reason. And not just any passenger, Dr. Olivia Harper. Do you even know who she is?" Sophia's heart sank further. "She's a doctor," she offered weakly. Dennis sighed, shaking his head. "She's one of the most respected surgeons in the country and a keynote speaker at a major medical conference. She's also on the board of an organization that actively advocates for equity and accountability in corporate practices, including airlines." Sophia stared at him, the weight of his words pressing down on her like a lead blanket. "I didn't know," she whispered. "That's the problem," Dennis said sharply. "You didn't know, and you didn't bother to find out. You acted on instinct, and now it's coming back to bite you. And the airline." Sophia looked away, tears welling in her eyes. "What do I do now?" Dennis stood, his expression softening slightly. "You take responsibility. Own up to your mistake, and hope that Dr. Harper is as forgiving as she is influential." By the time Olivia arrived at her hotel, the airline's public relations team was already working overtime. A formal email from the company's CEO, Richard Hale, awaited her in her inbox, along with a proposed draft of a public apology. Olivia read the draft carefully, her sharp eyes catching the subtle language designed to deflect full accountability. Phrases like miscommunication and unintended error peppered the statement, and Olivia's jaw tightened as she reached the end. She picked up her phone and dialed the CEO's direct line. To her surprise, he answered on the second ring. "Dr. Harper," Hale began, his tone cordial but laced with tension. "Thank you for reaching out. I hope you've had a chance to review our statement." "I have," Olivia replied evenly. "And I find it lacking. Miscommunication, unintended error. Those words minimize what happened on that flight. This wasn't a simple misunderstanding. It was a direct result of systemic biases that your organization has failed to address." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line before Hale responded. "I understand your concerns, Dr. Harper. We're committed to making this right." "Commitment requires action, not just words," Olivia said firmly. "Here's what I want: a transparent investigation, mandatory bias training for all employees, and a public acknowledgement of what truly happened. Anything less is unacceptable." Hale sighed, his professional facade slipping slightly. "We'll do our best to meet your expectations." "You'll do more than that," Olivia replied. "Because if you don't, this will go public in ways you can't control." The following morning, Sophia arrived at the airline's headquarters for her disciplinary hearing. The sleek glass building loomed over her as she stepped through the revolving doors, her stomach twisting with anxiety. She had barely slept the night before, haunted by the memory of Olivia's calm yet piercing words. "This isn't the last time we'll speak." Sophia was escorted to a small conference room, where 3 executives waited, their expressions unreadable. A recorder sat on the table between them, and the room's sterile atmosphere only heightened Sophia's sense of dread. "Miss Blake," one of the executives began, her tone formal. "Thank you for coming. This is a disciplinary hearing regarding the incident on Flight 382. We've reviewed the initial reports, and we'll be asking you to provide your account of the events." Sophia nodded, her hands trembling in her lap. "I understand." As the questions began, Sophia struggled to articulate her reasoning without sounding defensive. Every word she spoke felt like another nail in the coffin of her career. When one executive asked her to explain why she had assumed Olivia didn't belong in first class, Sophia faltered. I thought there had been a mistake," she said weakly. Her demeanor, it didn't match the typical profile of a first-class passenger. The words hung in the air like a bad smell. The executives exchanged glances, their expressions hardening. "Miss Blake," the senior executive said, her tone colder now. "What exactly does the typical profile of a first-class passenger look like to you?" Sophia opened her mouth to respond but found no words. The silence that followed was deafening. Across town, Olivia sat in a sleek boardroom with the airline's top executives, including Hale. The mood was tense as Olivia outlined her demands for systemic change, her voice steady and unwavering. "This isn't about punishing individuals," she said. "It's about addressing the culture that allows incidents like this to happen. I'm not here to negotiate. I'm here to ensure that what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else." Hale nodded, his expression grim. "We understand, Dr. Harper. You have our full cooperation." "I'll hold you to that," Olivia replied, "because this is just the beginning." Turning the tide. Olivia Harper sat at a polished glass table in her hotel suite, her tablet glowing with emails and updates from colleagues and allies. She had called in reinforcements, not out of anger but out of resolve. Her network included leaders, activists, and corporate reform advocates who knew how to bring about change in the most resistant institutions. And the airline was about to learn just how determined Olivia could be. Her phone buzzed with a new message, "Draft for your review. Sensitivity training outline attached." Olivia opened the document, skimming through the airline's initial efforts to implement diversity and bias education. It was a step, but not nearly enough. Her assistant, Mariah, a sharp-minded woman who had worked with Olivia for years, appeared on the video call Olivia had scheduled. "You read it?" Mariah asked, not needing to specify which document. "I have," Olivia replied, her tone measured. "It's generic, surface level. They're trying to tick boxes." Mariah sighed. "That's what most corporations do when they're caught off guard. We've seen it before. And we've pushed past it before," Olivia said, leaning forward. "This time will be no different. I want a comprehensive plan, real training, real accountability, and an independent review process. Can you draft a response that's hard to ignore?" Mariah smirked. "On it." As the call ended, Olivia felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had always believed in the power of persistence, and this fight was no exception. At the airline's headquarters, Sophia Blake sat in a break room, staring blankly at the untouched coffee in front of her. The disciplinary hearing had left her shaken. The pointed questions, the thinly veiled disappointment from the executives, and her own floundering attempts to explain her actions replayed in her mind like a broken record. Dennis approached cautiously, taking the seat across from her. "You look like you could use some advice," he said. Sophia didn't respond immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I've ruined everything." Dennis sighed, his tone softer than it had been in the past days. "You made a mistake, the big one. But the question is, what are you going to do about it?" Sophia shook her head. "What can I do? I already gave my statement." The executives looked like they'd already made up their minds. "They probably have," Dennis admitted. "But you still have a choice. Accept what's coming and do the bare minimum to move on, or use this as a wake-up call to change. For yourself and for others." Sophia looked at him, her eyes filled with desperation. "And if it's too late?" Dennis leaned back, folding his arms. "It's never too late to take responsibility. But you have to mean it." Meanwhile, Olivia's meeting with Richard Hale and the airline's leadership team was underway in a sleek downtown office. The air was tense as Olivia outlined her expectations, each point delivered with the precision of a seasoned advocate. "Here's what I need to see," she said, her tone firm. mandatory and recurring bias training for all employees, starting with leadership, a clear, transparent protocol for addressing discrimination complaints, and a public acknowledgement of this incident, not just an apology, but a commitment to real change. Hale shifted in his seat. "We're prepared to meet most of these demands," he said cautiously, "but we prefer to handle the public aspect internally. We don't want this to turn into a PR disaster." "It already is a PR disaster," Olivia countered. "You don't get to sweep this under the rug and pretend it didn't happen. Your customers deserve to know what steps you're taking to ensure this doesn't happen again." One of the executives spoke up, his tone measured but defensive. "Dr. Harper, we've reviewed the footage and understand the gravity of the situation. But is it fair to hold an entire organization accountable for one employee's mistake?" Olivia's sharp gaze landed on him. "This isn't about one employee. This is about the culture that allowed her to feel justified in making that decision. That culture didn't appear overnight, and addressing it won't happen overnight either. But you have to start somewhere." The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over the table like a heavy blanket. Back at her apartment, Sophia sat alone, scrolling through social media. News of the incident had begun to spread, and while the airline had yet to release an official statement, passengers from Flight 382 were already sharing their accounts online. One post stood out, a tweet from a passenger in the economy cabin. "Saw Dr. Harper moved from first class for no good reason. The attendant who did it looked smug, but karma works fast. Hashtag do better, airlines." Sophia's stomach churned. The internet didn't forget, and this was only the beginning. Her phone buzzed with a message from her manager. "Follow-up meeting tomorrow at 9:00 a.m. Be prepared to discuss next steps." Sophia closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. She had spent years building her career, and now it was all crumbling around her. The following morning, Olivia arrived at the airline's headquarters, escorted to a large conference room where a team of senior executives waited. Hale stood to greet her, his expression carefully composed. "Dr. Harper," he began, gesturing for her to take a seat. "Thank you for coming. We've reviewed your recommendations, and I want to assure you that we're taking them seriously." "I hope so," Olivia replied, "because anything less than full accountability is unacceptable." The discussion was intense but productive. The airline agreed to several of Olivia's demands, including the implementation of comprehensive bias training and the creation of an independent oversight committee to handle future complaints. Hale also committed to releasing a public statement acknowledging the incident and outlining the steps the company was taking to address systemic issues. Across the city, Sophia sat in her manager's office, the atmosphere heavy with unspoken tension. Her manager, a stern but fair woman named Karen Monroe, regarded her with a mix of disappointment and resolve. "Sophia," Karen began, "I'm going to be blunt. The fallout from this incident is significant, and it's not just about you. The company's reputation is at stake, and we can't ignore the role your actions played in this." Sophia nodded, her voice barely audible. "I understand." "I hope you do," Karen said, "because this isn't just about disciplinary action. It's about how you move forward. You've been suspended indefinitely, and sensitivity training will be mandatory if you hope to return. But even beyond that, you need to take a hard look at yourself and the biases that led to this situation." Sophia swallowed hard, tears welling in her eyes. "I will. I promise." Karen's expression softened slightly. "Words are a start, but actions will matter more." As Olivia prepared to leave the airline's headquarters, she received a final handshake from Hale. "We'll keep you updated on our progress," he assured her. "You'd better," Olivia replied, "because I'll be watching." As she stepped into the crisp afternoon air, Olivia felt a sense of accomplishment. The fight wasn't over, but progress had been made. This wasn't just about her. It was about creating a ripple effect that would inspire change far beyond the walls of this airline. Sophia, meanwhile, sat alone in her apartment, reflecting on the choices that had brought her to this moment. She had a long road ahead, but for the first time, she began to understand what true accountability looked like. Seeds of change. The airline's public statement went live at 9 a.m. sharp, accompanied by a press release and a video message from CEO Richard Hale. The world was watching as Hale addressed the incident directly, outlining the steps the company was taking to address the cultural and systemic issues that had led to the situation. We acknowledge the incident involving Dr. Olivia Harper, a highly respected professional and valued passenger on Flight 382, Hale said, his tone measured but serious. What happened on that flight was unacceptable. We have initiated a full review of our policies and training programs to ensure this never happens again. Dr. Harper has graciously agreed to consult with us on these reforms, and we are committed to making meaningful changes. The video quickly gained traction, with media outlets, social media influencers, and advocacy groups weighing in. Some applauded the airline's transparency, while others remained skeptical, calling the move performative until tangible results were seen. Olivia watched the video from her hotel room, her expression unreadable. While the public acknowledgement was a step forward, she knew from experience that change required more than words. She picked up her phone and called Mariah. "Draft an op-ed," she said. "I want to outline what systemic accountability looks like and why corporate responsibility goes beyond apologies." Maria didn't miss a beat. "Got it. Anything else? Reach out to the advocacy groups following this. Let's get them involved in monitoring the airline's progress." As Olivia hung up, she felt a familiar sense of purpose. This wasn't just about holding one company accountable. It was about setting a standard that others could follow. At the same time, Sophia sat in her small apartment, her laptop open to the airline's internal employee portal. A mandatory training module on unconscious bias had been assigned to her and all her colleagues. The title on the screen read, "Recognizing and Addressing Bias in the Workplace." Sophia sighed, her finger hovering over the start button. She had always prided herself on being professional and fair, but the past few days had forced her to confront a harsh reality. She had biases she hadn't acknowledged, and those biases had harmed someone. As the training video began, Sophia watched clips of simulated workplace scenarios, each one highlighting how subtle assumptions and unconscious prejudices could influence decisions. One segment featured a reenactment eerily similar to her interaction with Olivia, a flight attendant questioning a passenger's seat assignment based solely on appearances. The video paused, and a question appeared on the screen. What steps could the flight attendant have taken to ensure a fair and unbiased decision? Sophia stared at the question for a long moment before typing her answer. Ask for clarification without assumptions. Treat every passenger with equal respect and professionalism. Reflect on why I made the decision before acting. As she continued through the module, Sophia felt a mixture of guilt and determination. She couldn't change the past, but she could change how she approached the future. Meanwhile, Olivia's op-ed, titled "Beyond Apologies: A Call for Systemic Accountability in Corporate Culture," was published in a major online journal. In it, she recounted her experience on Flight 382, not as a personal grievance, but as a case study in how implicit biases could infiltrate even the most structured organizations. "Accountability isn't about finding a scapegoat," Olivia wrote. "It's about identifying the root causes of harmful behavior and addressing them head-on. This requires honesty, transparency, and a willingness to face uncomfortable truths. Real change happens when organizations commit to dismantling the systems that enable discrimination and replace them with systems that foster equity and respect." The article went viral within hours, shared by thought leaders, activists, and corporate executives alike. Olivia's inbox flooded with messages, some offering support, others seeking her expertise. One email stood out. It was from a mid-level manager at the airline who had read her op-ed and wanted to share their own experiences. "Thank you for your words," the email read. "I've seen the same biases you described, and I've struggled with how to address them. Your story has given me the courage to start speaking up." Olivia replied immediately, "Thank you for your honesty. Change starts with voices like yours." Let's connect. I'd love to hear more. Sophia's suspension stretched into its second week. The days were long and filled with reflection, but they were also filled with action. After completing the airline's mandatory training, she sought out additional resources, reading books and articles on unconscious bias and systemic discrimination. She even reached out to a diversity and inclusion consultant to schedule a personal coaching session. Her first session was humbling. The consultant, a no-nonsense woman named Camille, asked pointed questions that forced Sophia to examine her beliefs and behaviors. "What made you think Dr. Harper didn't belong in first class?" Camille asked, her gaze unwavering. Sophia hesitated, struggling to find the words. I don't know," she admitted. "I just had this feeling." "And where do you think that feeling came from?" Camille pressed. Sophia looked down, her cheeks burning with shame. I think it came from stereotypes I didn't even realize I had." Camille nodded. Acknowledging that is the first step. Now, the real work begins. As the weeks passed, the airline rolled out a series of reforms, including revamped training programs, a dedicated diversity and inclusion department, and a new passenger feedback platform. Olivia was invited to participate in the development of these initiatives, her insights shaping the company's new direction. One afternoon, as Olivia reviewed the latest training materials, she received a call from Richard Hale. "Dr. Harper." Hale began, his tone warmer than before. "I wanted to thank you personally for your contributions. We've already seen a shift in employee attitudes, and that's largely thanks to your guidance." "It's a start," Olivia replied. "But I'll be watching to make sure this momentum doesn't fade." Hale chuckled lightly. "I wouldn't expect anything less." Sophia's reinstatement came with conditions: continued sensitivity training, regular performance reviews, and a probationary period. She approached her return with a mix of apprehension and determination, knowing she had much to prove, not just to the airline, but to herself. Her first flight back was uneventful, but as she walked through the first-class cabin, she felt a pang of anxiety every time she glanced at a passenger. Would they judge her? Did they know? At one point, a woman in a sharp blazer and glasses caught Sophia's eye, reminding her briefly of Olivia. Sophia straightened her posture, her voice steady as she said, "Good afternoon. Let me know if there's anything I can do to make your flight more comfortable." The woman smiled and nodded, and for the first time in weeks, Sophia felt a glimmer of hope. By the end of the month, Olivia's advocacy had extended beyond the airline. She had been invited to speak at conferences and corporate events, her message resonating with audiences eager to learn from her experience. Her influence was growing, but she remained grounded, her focus always on the broader mission. One evening, as she prepared for yet another keynote, Olivia received a handwritten letter in the mail. It was from Sophia. The letter was heartfelt, filled with apologies and reflections on what she had learned. "I can never undo what happened," Sophia wrote, "but I want you to know that it changed me. Thank you for holding me accountable. It's a lesson I'll carry with me for the rest of my life." Olivia read the letter twice, her expression softening. She folded it carefully and placed it in her bag, a reminder that even the smallest ripples could create waves of change. The legacy of accountability. Weeks turned into months, and the incident on Flight 382 evolved from a moment of conflict into a catalyst for profound change. The airline's commitment to reform became evident as they rolled out new initiatives that went beyond damage control, signaling a genuine shift in their corporate culture. Olivia Harper, once a passenger subjected to unjust treatment, had become a central figure in shaping this transformation. The airline's transformation. The first visible sign of change came in the form of a revamped employee training program. Dubbed the Equity Initiative, the program included mandatory workshops on unconscious bias, cultural sensitivity, and inclusive decision-making. Employees were encouraged to share their own experiences and reflect on how biases could influence their actions. In a promotional video for the initiative, employees spoke candidly about what they had learned. One flight attendant, a veteran of the airline for 15 years, shared her newfound perspective. "I didn't realize how deeply ingrained some of my assumptions were. This training opened my eyes to how much work I still need to do." The airline also partnered with external advocacy groups to conduct annual audits of its diversity and inclusion practices. This external oversight ensured that their commitment wasn't just performative, but backed by measurable results. Richard Hale, the airline's CEO, became a visible advocate for change, delivering speeches at industry conferences about the importance of equity and accountability. At one event, he acknowledged Olivia's pivotal role. "Dr. Harper's courage and clarity forced us to confront uncomfortable truths. She reminded us that accountability isn't a one-time act, it's an ongoing responsibility." Olivia's expanding influence. Olivia's work with the airline was only the beginning. The success of her advocacy inspired other organizations to seek her guidance. She was invited to join corporate boards, speak at international conferences, and consult with companies eager to address systemic biases within their structures. At one such conference, Olivia stood before an audience of 2,000 executives, her voice steady and her presence commanding. "Accountability is more than just admitting a mistake," she said. "It's about examining the systems that allowed the mistake to happen and dismantling them. It's about creating a culture where respect and fairness aren't just aspirations, they're expectations." Her words were met with a standing ovation. But Olivia didn't linger on the applause. She was already thinking about the next step in her journey, expanding her reach to industries beyond aviation. Sophia's journey of redemption. For Sophia Blake, the months following the incident were a time of intense introspection and growth. Her probationary period had been challenging, but it also provided her with opportunities to prove that she was committed to change. Sophia took every training session seriously, often going beyond what was required. She enrolled in courses on emotional intelligence and cultural competency, and she began volunteering with a local nonprofit that supported underrepresented communities in pursuing careers in aviation. Her interactions with passengers became more intentional. She listened more, observed more, and treated every person she encountered with a level of care and respect that hadn't been there before. On one flight, an elderly woman traveling alone became anxious during turbulence. Sophia knelt beside her, holding her hand and offering reassurance until the plane stabilized. The woman's gratitude was palpable, and Sophia felt a sense of fulfillment she hadn't experienced in years. One day, Sophia received an email from Richard Hale. It was brief but powerful. "Sophia, I've been following your progress. Your dedication hasn't gone unnoticed. Keep it up." For the first time in months, Sophia allowed herself a small smile. Redemption wasn't easy, but she was determined to earn it. A chance encounter. Fate had a way of weaving paths together, and Olivia and Sophia's paths were about to cross again. It was a crisp autumn morning, and Olivia was flying to Chicago for another speaking engagement. As she boarded the plane, she noticed the flight attendant greeting passengers at the door. It was Sophia. Their eyes met, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. Sophia's face turned pale, but she quickly recovered, offering a polite, professional smile. "Good morning, Dr. Harper," Sophia said, her voice steady, but her eyes betraying a hint of nervousness. Olivia nodded. "Good morning." As Olivia took her seat in first class, she couldn't help but notice how different Sophia seemed. Her movements were deliberate, her demeanor calm yet attentive. She interacted with passengers warmly, making sure everyone felt welcomed and cared for. Halfway through the flight, Sophia approached Olivia's seat with a tray of coffee and tea. "Dr. Harper," she began, her voice quieter now. "I just wanted to say, thank you." Olivia raised an eyebrow. "Thank me?" "For holding me accountable," Sophia said, her gaze earnest. "I've spent the past few months reflecting on my actions, and I've learned a lot. I know I can't undo what happened, but I'm trying to be better. I owe that to you." Olivia studied her for a moment before responding. "Accountability is a journey," she said. "The fact that you've taken it seriously means something." Keep going. Sophia nodded, her shoulders relaxing slightly. I will. A legacy of accountability. As the plane touched down in Chicago, Olivia reflected on how much had changed since that fateful flight. What began as an act of discrimination had transformed into a powerful movement for change. The airline was better for it, Sophia was better for it, and perhaps the world was better for it. But Olivia knew her work was far from over. Every success was a reminder that there were still countless battles to be fought, countless systems to be reformed. She welcomed the challenge, knowing that each step forward brought the world closer to the equity and fairness she had always fought for. As she stepped off the plane and into the bustling terminal, Olivia felt a renewed sense of purpose. The sky stretched endlessly above her, a fitting reminder that the possibilities for change were as vast as the horizon itself. A new horizon. The Chicago terminal buzzed with the usual energy of hurried travelers, but Olivia Harper moved with a calm, steady purpose. Her encounter with Sophia during the flight lingered in her mind, a moment of redemption not only for Sophia, but also a reminder of why accountability mattered. As Olivia stepped into the terminal, her phone vibrated. It was a message from Mariah. You're trending again. The op-ed's impact is snowballing. Major corporations are reaching out for guidance. Call me when you land. Olivia smiled faintly. The seeds she had planted were sprouting, and the ripple effects of her advocacy were spreading further than she had anticipated. It wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about using her platform to drive meaningful change. She dialed Mariah as she navigated the terminal. Mariah, what's the latest? Maria's voice came through, animated as always. First off, the op-ed is blowing up. You're being called the corporate accountability architect. Catchy, right? Second, the airline CEO just announced a partnership with 3 advocacy organizations to oversee their reforms. And third, I've got a dozen speaking invites for you, including one from a global equity summit in Geneva. Olivia chuckled. That's a lot. Geneva, though. Let's put a pin in that one. I want to focus on what we've started here first. How's the follow-up with the airline's progress tracking? They're on schedule, Mariah replied. Bias training is underway. They're publishing quarterly updates and that new passenger feedback platform. It's already live. Good, Olivia said. Let's make sure they stay on track. Sophia's second chance. Back at her apartment, Sophia stared at her laptop, an email from her manager open on the screen. Her probationary period had ended, and her performance reviews had been glowing. But this wasn't just about earning her job back. It was about proving to herself that she could rise above her past mistakes. The email congratulated her on her progress and included an offer for a new role. Flight Attendant Supervisor, Diversity and Inclusion Liaison. Sophia's breath caught in her throat. The role wasn't just a promotion, it was a responsibility. The position would involve mentoring new hires, ensuring they received comprehensive training in equity and inclusion, and working with the airline's new diversity office to implement long-term cultural change. The words from her final session with Camille, the diversity consultant, echoed in her mind. Redemption isn't about erasing mistakes. It's about using what you've learned to make a difference. Sophia clicked reply and began typing. Thank you for the opportunity. I accept the role and look forward to contributing to our mission of creating a more inclusive workplace. A meeting of paths. Weeks later, at a corporate leadership summit in New York City, Olivia prepared to take the stage. The room was packed with executives from industries ranging from tech to healthcare, all eager to hear her speak about accountability and systemic change. As she stepped onto the stage, Olivia's sharp eyes scanned the audience. Near the front, she spotted a familiar face. Sophia Blake. Dressed in a sharp blazer, Sophia sat attentively, a notebook open on her lap. Their eyes met briefly, and Sophia offered a small, respectful nod. Olivia smiled inwardly, taking it as a sign of how far they both had come. Good morning, Olivia began, her voice carrying effortlessly across the room. We're here today to talk about accountability. not as a punishment, but as a foundation for growth and trust. True accountability requires courage, humility, and the willingness to face uncomfortable truths. It's not easy, but it's necessary. She paused, letting the words sink in. I know this because I've lived it. I've seen firsthand how one moment can reveal the cracks in a system, and how addressing those cracks can lead to transformation, not just for individuals, but for entire organizations. The room was silent, the weight of her words palpable. And let me be clear, Olivia continued, change is never about perfection. It's about progress. It's about creating environments where everyone, regardless of who they are or where they come from, is treated with dignity and respect. The audience erupted into applause as Olivia stepped back from the podium, the standing ovation lasting long after she left the stage. A shared commitment. After the event, Sophia approached Olivia cautiously, her steps deliberate. "Dr. Harper," she began, her voice steady but respectful. "I just wanted to thank you again. Not just for what you did, but for what you've inspired me to do." Olivia regarded her thoughtfully. "What you've done for yourself is far more important than anything I could have done for you." Sophia smiled. "Still, you showed me what accountability really means. I'm trying to live up to that." "Good," Olivia said, her tone warm but firm. "Because the work never stops. But I'm glad to see you've embraced it." As Sophia walked away, Olivia felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. Change wasn't easy, but it was always worth the effort. The legacy. Months turned into years, and the impact of Flight 382 continued to ripple outward. The airline became a model for equity and accountability, its reforms inspiring other companies to follow suit. Olivia's advocacy expanded into new industries, her influence shaping policies and cultures worldwide. Sophia became a respected leader within the airline, her role as diversity and inclusion liaison, allowing her to mentor others and ensure that no one else would experience what Olivia had endured. The two women, once on opposite sides of a conflict, had become unlikely allies in the pursuit of a shared goal, creating a world where respect, fairness, and accountability weren't just ideals but realities. And as Olivia looked toward the horizon, she knew the work was far from over. But with every step forward, every small victory, she felt a deep sense of purpose, a reminder that change, though difficult, was always possible.